Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 112 of Fracking Nightmare. And I'm pleased to say that we have a new guest tonight, somebody who's not been on the show before, and that's Blowe from NetPol. And we're going to be exploring the increasingly aggressive role being adopted by the British police against the anti-fracking campaign. But before we do that, today really is a day, or this week, of some celebration, because on Sunday, the Herald ran an article which suggested that the SNP were going to ban fracking in Scotland. And this is from a very reliable source. It was from Rob Edwards, who writes also for The Ferret in Scotland. And, Rob very much has his ear to the ground. So there was no question that this observation had a lot of credibility. And on Sunday, Rob wrote, "The Scottish Government is set to announce a ban on fracking, ending 6 years of fierce controversy. Ministers are putting the finishing touches to a permanent ban, replacing the moratorium they started in January 2015. This will spell the end of plans by the energy industry to frack for shale gas under swathes of central Scotland." The Sunday Herald understands that announcement has long been penciled in for this week, before the parliamentary recess and the SNP annual conference. Well, that was followed up this week, but this is why it's so significant, because the licensed areas in Scotland are right across the central belt there, right across the M80, where a significant chunk of the population actually reside. So, clearly this was an issue that was very much of concern to a significant chunk of the population in that central belt. Over on the right-hand side there, in the Firth of the Forth, you see the underground coal gasification licences, which had effectively been put to bed earlier this year. Well, we didn't have to wait too long, because it was on Tuesday, the 3rd of October, around about noon, and it came up on my feed. And I had to do a double take, because of course it was the BBC. So, we know we don't trust very much of what they say. So I had to get it from a more reliable source. But nonetheless, on this occasion, the BBC were spot on, except that it's not quite a ban. So the BBC said the Scottish Government backs a ban on fracking. Well, it's not a ban. It's described as an effective ban. But what it is an indefinite moratorium. So the reality is that the battle isn't over, because an indefinite moratorium is a bit of a contradiction of terms, really, because moratorium means a temporary ban based on pending further research. So an indefinite ban is a little bit open-ended. So the anti-fracking community in Scotland are certainly to be congratulated on this achievement, but there is still work to do to get that ban, that indefinite moratorium converted into an outright ban. Now, needless to say, J. Arthur Ratcliffe is spitting feathers, and the INEOS website was quick to respond. And this is from their website: "Shale gas ban a blow to Scotland." Well, it isn't, of course. It's a blow to INEOS. It's a fantastic achievement for Scotland. And but here it says on their website, a report commissioned by the Scottish Government had judged shale production safe. Well, there's also been other reports which, of course, have said completely the opposite. But as we know, INEOS are extremely selective. It says decision will negatively affect Scottish jobs, energy security and growth. Tom Pickering, the operations director at INEOS Shale, said, "It's a sad day for those of us who believe in evidence-led decision-making." Well, Tom, evidence-led. You know fine well that the evidence that is freely available for people to access would suggest that there is no way in hell that this should ever be unleashed anywhere, let alone in the densely populated area of central Scotland, and certainly not elsewhere in the country either. But needless to say, we know you're a bit of a sore loser here. And you've said the Scottish Government has turned its back on a potential manufacturing and jobs renaissance and lessened Scottish academia's place in the world by ignoring its findings. And you went on to say that the Scottish government was making decisions based on public opinion. Well, isn't that really what democracy is all about? And this was the poll ran by, I believe, the Scotsman in the recent days. And it says, do you think it's right that the Scottish government has permanently banned fracking? And it's a resounding 68% yes. So, Tom, you know, you are a sore loser. It's almost exactly 2 years since you attended my screening of Voices from the Gasfields, and you came along to that screening at the Dawson Centre in Falkirk with one of your company legal guys. And I remember that when I made the observation that, you know, I wasn't trying to get people to take everything I said or presented at face value, I simply wanted to stimulate their curiosity so that they would do their own research. And your legal guy turned to you and said, that could be a problem. So you know fine well that when people do their own research, they are extremely unlikely to agree with you that fracking across the Central Belt is a good idea. And on episode 97 of Fracking Nightmare, which was, I believe, over a year ago now, but here, this was, I put this graphic in place to that episode because it followed the debate in North Yorkshire in which you participated along with Kevin Hollinrake, the local MP. And I remember that you looked around the room as Kevin waxed lyrical and said that fracking in the UK is essential for UK energy security, whereas you have always maintained that INEOS has no intention of exploiting unconventional hydrocarbons in the UK for any other reason than you're providing your own feedstock for INEOS. In other words, actually making Jim Ratcliffe even more outrageously wealthy than he is right now. So down in Yorkshire, where INEOS also have some significant interests, there was a poll run in the Yorkshire Post last weekend. And actually, I believe the final result was even more than 87%, despite the best efforts of the only pro-fracker in England. Well, she's one of only female pro-fracker. There might be Ken Wilkinson to represent the male of the population. But Lorraine Allinson, who runs a number of holiday cottages just near the Knapton generating station. And funnily enough, I think Third Energy actually put some of their itinerant workers in there. So, of course, Lorraine gets some a direct benefit from Third Energy's presence. But in the Yorkshire Post, I think the final result was 89% think that fracking should not be allowed in Yorkshire. Well, Jim Ratcliffe is obviously not a happy camper. And no doubt he's currently coming up with a blackmail scheme, probably going to threaten to close Grangemouth and, you know, blag another 130 million from the British government to keep it open. But, you know, Tom Pickering is, I think, a dead man walking, because I'm sure that Tom had convinced Jim Ratcliffe that he had it all under control, that he had the SNP eating out the palm of his hands, as probably did Peter Riley, who was, I think, the PR director for INEOS Shale or INEOS Upstream. But hot news, I heard just literally a few minutes ago that Peter Riley has resigned. He's obviously decided that it's time to seek his fortune elsewhere, having completely blown INEOS's chances of abstracting gas in Scotland. Well, of course, INEOS are also trying to buy UK law. And of course, the definition of a corporatist state is effectively fascism. I mean, a very sensitive term, but that's precisely what it is. And so we have an injunction in place at the moment, although slightly diluted following the court hearing on September 12th. But Jim Ratcliffe and Tom Pickering are effectively trying to shut down all dissent against their activities in the UK, and obviously now particularly in England. Now, the judge has already acknowledged that he is well aware that INEOS effectively misled him by asking for an ex parte, a private hearing, prior to getting the injunction. And at the hearing on September 12th, he agreed that there needed to be a full 3-day hearing. And I believe that hearing is going to take place at the end of this month. Well, it was at the INEOS court case in London on September the 12th that I had the pleasure to hook up with Kevin. So Kevin, you're heading up the NetPol organisations, and we'll come back to the INEOS injunction in just a while. But NetPol is certainly proving to be an extremely valuable watchdog in terms of the descent of British policing into a corporate enforcement wing. But give us a bit of background. How did you get involved in police monitoring, and what led you to set up NetPol?
Well, I have been doing various different types of work around police monitoring since the early 1990s. I live in East London. The main area of work that I was doing for most of that period was on supporting the local communities in the area where I live. Predominantly not about protests, but about the policing of local communities. One of the things that I think changed significantly, where there was an overlap in terms of experiences, was the environmental movement in the latter part of sort of between 2007 and 2009, and the massive clampdown on climate camp. And NetPol was set up because as a way of bridging the experiences of the different groups that were doing work. So the original members included the group that I was part of, which was the Newer Monitoring Project, as well as Climate Camp Legal Team and the Legal Defence Monitoring Group, who do court support still. And that was back in 2009. And obviously, Climate Camp Legal Team no longer exists. It's now Green and Black Cross. And predominantly, most of the work that we do is in support of people's right to be able to protest. And since 2014, particularly because of the events that happened at Barton Moss, the main area of our work has been around supporting the anti-fracking movement and the right for people who are part of that to be able to protest.
Okay, and I mean, obviously, that was why you were at the hearing in London, and
Right.
you know, so what are your thoughts on this INEOS injunction?
Well, I mean, what essentially INEOS have attempted to do is to buy their own law, by which I mean, if you commit a criminal offence, or you're accused of a criminal offence, let's say obstruction of the highway, then you will be charged, you will be taken to court, you will have a chance to be able to prove your innocence, and you may well be convicted, and you may get a small fine. There's an understanding that, and there's always been an understanding where people are protesting, that there's a degree of conscience involved in the reasons and the motivations why people do that, and that's why, in general, people who are found guilty of offences, the very small minority, I have to say, of people who are found guilty of offences protest, generally get a conditional discharge. They get a small fine. What INEOS wants to do, and what other companies have tried to do, is basically have a second bite of the cherry. They want to be able to drag people back, and try and squeeze them for as much money as possibly can by summoning them back to court, under the threat that if they're unable to be able to potentially pay some of the claims of damages that might be brought, then they could be, either bankrupted or potentially even sent to prison for contempt of court. Now, what's alarming about that is not so much what could happen, because there's enormous risks for INEOS in terms of doing that. I mean, if they want to go after the entire anti-fracking movement and drag people to court, it's going to cost them an absolute fortune. But the real worry is that it puts people off. And what's different about INEOS's injunction compared to, say, the injunction that was applied by Europa down at Leith Hill, is that, I mean, that was for a very small particular site. INEOS's injunction covers a vast area of the East Midlands, Cheshire, parts of North and South Yorkshire. I mean, there's a lot of people that are worrying about the potential consequences of it.
But the reality is that if, and it's a massive if, this injunction is rubber stamped, then the ramifications go way beyond just the anti-fracking community. I mean, obviously, in the first instance, every other company involved in unconventional gas exploitation is going to seek to ride on the back of this and seek their own injunction. But what it effectively would do is create a precedent for any corporation that has any concern about any kind of dissent or public reaction against what it's proposing to do or is actually doing. They could effectively shut it down, or in the same vein, put the fear of God into people so that they might vocalize their concerns, but it will never get beyond that.
That's true. I mean, I think it's important to remember that this isn't the first time that this type of attempted action has been tried. I mean, other major companies, EDF notably, have tried this before. I think the difference is with those sort of companies, they have customers. There's points of pressure that can be applied to them. Whereas companies like INEOS have investors who basically just want to see their money and have proven very resistant to really giving much of a damn about
well, the problem with INEOS is that it doesn't have investors. INEOS is a private company.
Oh.
So, I mean, it's ostensibly owned by Jim Ratcliffe and a few other, a handful of financiers. And this is another problem in that there is very limited third-party oversight of their activities.
But more importantly, INEOS and Jim Ratcliffe don't give a damn what the public think of
exactly.
them. What they're concerned primarily about is about making money. So the leverage that's there is more difficult. I think the crucial thing is that it will provide a green light to the other smaller companies. So INEOS is basically acting as the lead for the rest of the fracking industry, saying we're the big boys. We're going to take this on first. If we win this is the direction you want to go. But I think it also has, it has other potential impacts that have, that make the decision about Scotland actually kind of a really interesting one, because if you're able to secure that particular type of law, then I think the ability to go back, for instance, to Wales and say, we're going to start throwing our weight about in Wales with potential new fracking sites is something that I think people need to worry about too. And without wanting, I don't want to over alarm people as well, because the other side of this is that it can be resisted. People can stand up to this, and I don't know what INEOS will do if hundreds of people decide that they're going to break the injunction if it's.
Oh well, I'll be on point. I can tell you that, as will many other people, because we've put ourselves in a position where we have nothing that they can take from us. And I'm not the only one in that situation. So I'll be absolutely on point. But I don't think, I have to say, I don't think that INEOS are going to be successful. Tom Pickering right now is a broken man. You've only got to look at, his demeanour and his body language in the interviews that he's given primarily to the Scottish press over the last couple of days. And I don't think he believed in a month of Sundays that the Scottish government would actually put this indefinite moratorium in place. And I'm sure he had convinced Jim Ratcliffe that, he had it all under control. And we also know that, the judge has actually opened the door to hearing evidence as to why there is an increase in public concern about this industry. And of course, the Scottish decision absolutely underlines why it is that there is a resistance to this industry. And the two guys that are on point, of course, are Joe Boyd and Joe Corry. Joe Corry is financing his own challenge. And Joe Boyd is, in a similar sort of financial position to myself. In fact, Joe right now is a full-time student. He has just been awarded his BSc in international relations, and he's now doing a master's course this year. But so this is a little bit of a distraction, but I know that both Joes have put an enormous amount of effort to pull together a really comprehensive case to challenge many of INEOS's statements, which actually we will, I think, see in the courts that INEOS did a little bit more than just mislead the judge. But just before we move on, Kevin, I just want to make the point that Joe Boyd is trying to finance his challenge through the crowd justice scheme. And as of earlier this afternoon, it stood at £7,155. Now, it says 5 days to go. I think that will probably be extended. But nonetheless, 255 people, and which I'm pleased to say I'm one of them, have contributed to this campaign. And I would implore people to make a contribution, however small, whatever it is that you feel you can afford. But, you know, Joe Boyd has put himself forward here. He's doing an enormous amount of work. He's liaising, you know, with a lot of people to pull together a really comprehensive case to show INEOS up for what they are. So would you endorse that, Kevin?
Certainly. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing is we've been on that particular issue around the threat or how people feel about the injunction undermining their ability or their raising their fears about the prospect of taking part in process. We've been trying to gather together evidence of that, which we'll be sharing with both sets of solicitors. I mean, it's been absolutely essential that they've stepped forward to fight this injunction, because what would have happened if they hadn't done that? It would have just sailed through. And I think what will happen when that hearing takes place is there will be some very fundamental arguments about the rights, Article 10 and 11 rights to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, that just wouldn't have been heard otherwise.
Well, in fact, the judge at the original hearing, and I'm almost quoting verbatim, he actually said that in the light of the evidence presented, he was minded to rubber stamp the injunction at the hearing on September the 12th. Because, of course, INEOS had presented the case without any counter view whatsoever, claiming, of course, that the reason they needed to hold it in private was because of fear for the safety of their employees. And I think that even in the very short presentations given by the legal representatives of Joe Boyd and Joe Corrie, the judge was able to see that that was grossly exaggerated. And there's actually no threat whatsoever from what is an absolutely and essentially peaceful campaign to raise awareness of the dangers of this industry.
That's my recollection too, and I think maybe if we have time in the course of this discussion, if we can also maybe touch on some of the other lurid and sensational claims made by the fracking industry, which I think have had a direct effect on the way that policing has developed across the different sites.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, we'll take a short break there. When we come back, we are going to go straight into a short clip from a film that I believe you commissioned. And it's going to look at some of the gratuitous aggression, some might say violence, that has been adopted by the police at primarily Preston New Road, but not essentially, but primarily at Preston New Road against the anti-fracking community. So we'll take a short break. We'll roll into just 2.5 minutes or so of your film, and where people can then view the fuller version of it, and then we'll talk about the implications of that.
police to stop brutalising us.
Are you okay? Oh my God, she's screaming! Are you okay?
It's all right.
Look at this dragging people, guys.
I want them to allow us our right to peaceful protest, and I want them to stop assaulting us, and I want people to know what they're doing. So,
if we hadn't some of these people, because I'm not prepared to stand at a gate and be thrown about, if we hadn't some of these people, Quadrilla will just walk straight in, and it'd just go on.
The vast majority of protest activity has been highly disruptive, and it tends to involve lock-ons, blocking of the road, blocking of the site, but it is not violent. And I think that is generally very much the intention of the protesters, not to offer violence, not to be threatening, but to cause disruption to Quadrilla's activities.
some days you can go down there and it's relatively peaceful. Other days you can go down there and you are literally thrown about and assaulted all day long. Some days are bits of both. You not only don't know from one day to the next what type of policing or treatment you're going to get, you honestly don't know from 1 minute to the next.
If there's an element of randomness in who is arrested, it can be off-putting for people to turn up because you simply don't know if you're going to be arrested on a particular day for doing something that was allowed yesterday. And so you could appeal to an officer and say, hang on a minute, we were doing this yesterday. It doesn't mean that you won't be arrested on the second day or the third day.
Say a fellow protector on Friday who stood his ground, then did start moving along after the 5 steps had been given, and he was arrested.
But our approach, right from the word go, has been that we want to have the very low-key policing operation. We want to engage, we want to negotiate, we want to facilitate, and wherever possible, we want to allow people that right to protest.
Miranda, another girl, she's a local councillor, she's been pulled, pushed, torn all the ligaments in her knee, all because she...
So Kevin, there you have Superintendent Robert Shaw making the observation that the goal of Lancashire Police is to be very low-key in their policing operations. He also recognised that the protesters or protectors are not violent, are not there to offer resistance, but to cause disruption. Yet what we witnessed there, surely by anybody's standards, is totally disproportionate.
Yeah, I mean, the operation in Lancashire has just been an absolute textbook example of how to essentially escalate the level of aggression and the oppressive nature of the policing when you essentially don't get what you want. So the police, I think at the early stages, were hoping that the protest will be over fairly shortly because of the resolution and the determination of people on the ground, and the fact that they were going to be there in, day out, and were prepared to engage in, as the officer said, disruption, but it wasn't in any way violent. There were arrests, but I think possibly the turning point came, I guess, probably at the end of February, early March of this year, when there was support from beyond just the local area. And one of the crucial things about the anti-fracking movement is it looks to solidarity and support from different parts of the country. One of the things that happened then is that Lancashire Police and Quadrilla, and subsequently the Police and Crime Commissioner for the area, have all started to point the finger at so-called outsiders coming in and stirring things up, and heard the expression professional protesters used a few times. I'm sure some of them would wonder why it is they're not getting paid, but and this is something that we've seen before. This isn't something which is new to Lancashire. There is an approach that's happened with the police, which, I mean, the same things were said about Barton Moss, the same things were said about Balkham, and it's a way of being able to justify the escalation in the police, of the way that the police respond to those situations. And what it's done is it's driven the tactics. So because of the police's absolute refusal to allow even the most minor disruption, people have begun to say, well, if I'm going to get arrested anyway, I might as well get arrested for locking on and actually stopping the site rather than something that's, that's minor.
Now, Kevin, the government's own guidelines, they actually state that peaceful protest may include nuisance and disruption, but that does not in itself make it unlawful.
I mean, not just the UK's guidelines. There's international guidance guidelines that the UK government is signed up to, which makes this clear. And the Joint Committee on Human Rights, when it was reporting on the aftermath of the sort of the previous decades of environmental movement and climate camp, said exactly the same thing. Protest is by its nature disruptive, but it's very clear that there is a difference between disruption and violence. The problem is that the police don't seem to be able to be willing to tolerate anything that is disruptive, that treat everybody who's involved in that as basically a criminal, and respond accordingly. And I think that's been what's driven that very, very aggressive response that we've seen in the film and which we've seen throughout the summer.
Now, just to give credit where credit's due, that film was commissioned, I think, by yourself, but is available to be watched in full on Gathering Place Films, their YouTube channel, or on your website, www.netpol.org. Now, Kevin, what do you think that the police are being told in their morning briefing? Because we know that up until quite recently, there was an attempt to classify anyone involved in the anti-fracking campaign as a domestic extremist. And in fact, it was Bishop Graham Cray, a resident of Kirby Misperton, who took great exception to being labelled a domestic extremist. And so he challenged, or through the church, they challenged the government's labelling and actually got the anti-fracking community removed from the prevent strategy. But it doesn't seem to have filtered down. And in fact, if anything, the attitude of the police to the anti-fracking community seems to be more aggressive today than it was even at Barton Moss.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think the part of the problem is that there's so much of the police's claims to be respecting the limits that are placed on them by human rights legislation is essentially a tick box exercise. I think it's really important for people to understand what it is that the police are for in relation to these protests, so or where they stand in relation to this, because I think most people's perceptions of the police is, well, they're there to deal with crime, and actually that's only a relatively small part of what the police are there to do. I mean, the police are there essentially to provide to maintain order. They exist, and they've always existed, to maintain a degree of social stability, even if that social stability is fundamentally exploitative or unfair, or in this particular instance, damaging to the environment. And so, although what human rights law is supposed to do is to provide some protection by providing some guidance to the police, I mean, I think there is a certain amount of, well, we tick the box to say that we recognise this, and that's why people get so angry about their treatment. How can they do this to us? Well, the problem is that they can. And they are. And one of the things I say when I do training for Green and Black Cross is you have to understand that no matter how you might know about, how much you might know about the laws, the police will arrest you if they want to arrest you. And about all you can do, obviously, is deal with is complain afterwards, which is very frustrating to.
Well, and of course the problem is as well, if you, especially if you can't get legal aid. And by the way, breaking news again. Judge Snow, who has been appointed as the judge in a recent case in Blackpool, he's a circuit judge. He normally sits in Westminster, so clearly he has been sent up to Blackpool to take a hard line against the protectors there. And in his remarks today, he stated that in his opinion, legal aid should be removed from people arrested in the anti-fracking campaign.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I mean, it is an indication of just how much I think that I mean, I guess it's how much of a success the anti-fracking movement has been. I mean, people's been prepared to be arrested, and it's, I mean, essentially, it's blocked up the magistrates' court in Blackpool. I mean, they are having to push people off to other magistrates' courts across the whole of the northwest.
Well, and you know what? I mean, I know it sounds a bit perverse, but in some ways, I would see that as an opportunity because certainly, you know, if I'm in court, it'll be as litigant in person. And if legal aid's not available, it actually forces people to go to court as litigant in person. Now, some of those, unfortunately, will inevitably be like the proverbial lamb to the slaughter, but others will do their research. Others will really pick up the gauntlet and, I think, go places that the legal profession actually couldn't go themselves because they are constrained by their own commitment to the Bar Association. So, you know, it's not necessarily all negative, but I appreciate that, you know, not everyone's necessarily going to see it that way.
I think the other thing is that we need to understand that whatever a conservative, small c conservative judge says about legal aid, people are still entitled to it. People are still entitled to be able to get access to lawyers. I mean, one of the problem is, and one of the things that we always emphasise, is that you need to get a lawyer who understands and is sympathetic to social movements and understands protest law as well. There are a lot of bad lawyers out there, and it's one of the reasons why we've tried to steer people towards those lawyers that are likely to be more sympathetic.
And it is, of course, why the number of convictions versus the number of arrests is remarkably low.
Yeah, I mean, particularly in relation to, as these are public order offences. So I don't know whether you're familiar with this statistic, but the in general for public order offences, or ones relating to in some way to public order, the conviction rate's very, very high. For protests, it's about half of what it would be, and for anti-fracking protests so far, it's been tiny. You know, not even a third of people even make it to court.
Because but the arrest in many cases, and we're going to look at a couple of examples of those, are intended to be purely intimidatory, to either create a situation where people are bailed away or to actually discourage them from further participation.
I think that's definitely what people have felt, and I think there's been a pattern of that from across different sites in different parts of the country, and obviously protest camps or protector camps are vulnerable to that, because quite often there's going to be different numbers of people around different times of the day. You know, you remove 6 people from the side of a road and you've got nobody there that is in a position to be able to stop a lorry or to continue a blockade if they want.
What the police don't seem to have cottoned onto, though, or the establishment in general doesn't seem to have cottoned onto, is that the more gratuitous their aggression, the more gratuitous the arrest, the more likely it is to actually galvanise people into actually escalating their own participation.
I mean, one of the reasons why we did the film was I think a sense that, particularly up in Lancashire, there was a lot of people on the site or in the area or part of the movement there who knew what was going on, but less recognition from the sort of wider public. Now, there's lots of live streaming going on, but it's quite difficult when there's, you know, hundreds of hours of stuff unless you're really committed to actually go through all of that. And we wanted to make sure that there was a wider sense from within public who may be sympathetic, which is why we thought, let's put this together. We kind of know what's been going on. Let's pick out some of the examples and let's focus on the testimony of people who are actually on the front line. Right? I'm not in the film. I don't need to be. There are plenty of people that are perfectly able to articulate, really powerfully articulate, what they feel about being campaigning against fracking and what they feel about policing.
Well, let's have a look at a few historical things, well, a couple of historical things. Let me go to this one here. I believe this is actually Caroline Lucas's son. And this was the bank holiday weekend in Balcombe. And this was totally gratuitous because nothing was coming in or out that weekend. And, you know, effectively, this particular protest was, you know, more for, if you like, getting wider awareness of the Balcombe campaign. And the police actually probably enhanced that by a significant order of magnitude. by their own behaviour. And here you can clearly see the officer applying his thumb to the pressure point behind the ear in a bid to try to get him to release his grip.
You know, and I know that similar tactics have been used on the front line in Lancashire, and that we've seen instances of that. One of the things I think is really interesting about the, I'm sure you're aware of this, but we put in a freedom of information request to Lancashire Police to try and get details of the first 2 weeks of the rolling resistance of the use of force by officers, because from April there's a requirement that every police force documents and records when officers use force. And what was seen from that is that there was an average of 9 times a day, every day for 19 days, that the police were using force against campaigners, which is, you know, it's an indication of just how much there was a level of aggression that had built up by that stage. That people were, and we've seen other examples of, you know, people being pushed into hedges, people being pushed to the road. I mean, really shocking behaviour.
Well, we're going to see a little bit of that a bit later on, and it's right up close and personal. And by the way, the officer involved in my arrest actually had to put on his report that he had used force. The full detail of which I'm not yet privy to, but that will come at some date. And we'll talk more about that later. First of all, I want to talk about, I mean, this was an iconic shot from Barton Moss. Vanda was targeted by the police. She was clearly a thorn in their sides at Barton Moss. And she's been a thorn in the side again of North Yorkshire Police. And I'm going to show a short clip here of her arrest at Kirby Misperton a couple of weeks ago, where she was literally rugby tackled by an inspector, who then subsequently, having got her on the ground, handed her over to a couple of his minions. And well, let's take a look at what happened here.
Two on this, one on this one on this one.
I've got neck injuries and back injuries. I've got neck injuries and back injuries. Your officer is out of order. You better phone me an ambulance.
Careful, careful!
Ah! Ah! Get off me arm! Get off me arm! Get off me arm! I've got neck injuries!
She's got injuries.
I've got neck injuries and shoulder injuries! And a crushed torso! Get off me arm! Get off me arm!
Put your phone down, please.
It's a public place, my lad.
You're not under arrest.
I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong.
No, listen, I
haven't done anything wrong.
Are you alright?
I haven't done anything wrong.
Are you okay?
No.
You're not coming or not? Come on.
I haven't done anything wrong.
Now, Kevin, I have to say that Vanda was taken to hospital eventually. She was taken to Scarborough Hospital, where she was subsequently released without charge. Yet the person that took that video, who can clearly be seen in the stills at the front of that clip, was standing right up against the hedge. Right away from the incident, she was simply filming what was occurring with Vanda being manhandled by the other officers. And then she was chased, rugby tackled, and subsequently arrested, as was another person who simply was standing alongside there filming. So those two were arrested, and they are still facing charges of obstruction. But the reality is that they were clearly arrested because they were filming this incident.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a new development. So it's been long established that you have an absolute right to be able to photograph if you're in a public space, and in fact, it's a right that was hard fought for, particularly by photographers. I mean, particularly professional photographers who push back very strongly against the government's attempts or the police's attempts to try and use anti-terrorism laws.
Well, I think we've got the document that still stands good today. I mean, this is freely available. People can find it online. It is from 2010, 26th of August 2010, written by the now defunct Association of Chief Police Officers of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. But let me just read what it says here. It says, I'm writing to you in my capacity as chair of the ACPO Communications Advisory Group, which sits in the presidential business area. There have been a number of recent instances highlighted in the press where officers have detained photographers and deleted images from their cameras. I seek your support in reminding your officers and staff that they should not prevent anyone from taking photographs in public. This applies equally to members of the media and public seeking to record images who do not need a permit to photograph or film in public places. ACPO guidance is as follows. There are no powers prohibiting the taking of photographs, film or digital images in a public place. Therefore, members of the public and press should not be prevented from doing so. We need to cooperate with the media and amateur photographers. They play a vital role as their images help us identify criminals. Unfortunately, many of the criminals that we're seeing at the anti-fracking campaigns are wearing yellow. We must acknowledge that citizen journalism is a feature of modern life, and police officers are now photographed and filmed more than ever. Unnecessarily restricting photography, whether for the casual tourist or professional, is unacceptable, and it undermines public confidence in the police service. Once an image has been recorded, the police have no power to delete or confiscate it without a court order.
That's all absolutely correct. And I think the crucial thing is the point at the end. So police officers can only act if they have powers given to them. And they do not have the power to be able to stop you from taking pictures. They don't have the power to be able to look through your camera if they search you. They don't have the power to delete images that may be on your camera. I mean, it's absolutely fundamental that people should be able to go about doing that. And if officers are attempting to stop you from doing so, they're acting unlawfully.
Well, let's have a look at my arrest now, because as you can hear in the clip here, I was actually trying to get into a position to film where I wasn't in the way, because prior to standing in this position, I had been actually in the road. So I moved to this position to be out of the way. And as the officer tries to move me, you can hear me asking, under what power? And of course, he doesn't have an answer. But just take a look at this. This is literally from Monday week ago.
I'm behind you first. On what basis?
I got it, mate.
What power are you on? What?
Just get behind there.
What power?
Move back.
What? Excuse me?
Move back.
Excuse me, you're putting your hands on me?
What?
How is not obstructing the police?
Stand back now. Get back. Please get back now.
I'm getting back.
Thank you. Can you please go further back? We're going to get these out of here.
You'll do what you're told.
Excuse me?
Put your phone down.
You, what are you doing?
Put your phone down.
Hang on, just stay there, please.
Get the knee out of my chair.
Just stay there.
You calm down.
You out of order.
What's going on?
What's going on here, officers? So this is the police targeting filming again.
What are you doing?
Come back out sterile area, please. It's a sterile area. Sterile area, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Don't stop me from filming.
I'm not stopping filming.
And I've got hot coffee in my hand.
Yo, just be careful with your hot coffee in, please.
I've got a legal observer, disabled legal observer here.
I'm not pushing you.
You are pushing me.
You are pushing him because it's affecting on me, and I will fall over, and I might hurt
I don't want you
myself
to fall
quite
over.
badly.
He's disabled. Just cool down, officer.
1769. What was I under arrest for? How was I obstructing the police?
Take him away.
How was I obstructing you?
Right.
Whoa!
So that's the live streamer being arrested.
You've got a USB lead on that base.
I think.
Can we come this way, please? We're able to come this way. We need to move him out. Thank you.
Can you pass through there, please?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So that's Ian Crane live streaming obstruction of the police. Where are you going, Ian?
Sorry?
Where are you being
taken to? Where am I being taken to? Yeah, where am I being taken to? Yeah, where am I being taken to? You have to tell them. I think something fell out of my pocket back there. He's got me in the stress position here, and he's putting the finger in the back of my arm here.
Under what charge is this gentleman being arrested?
Ian, that's why you've been arrested.
Why am I being arrested?
Obstructing the highway, okay?
Obstructing the highway? Obstructing the highway?
Well, that's...
Thank you so much. Thank you. What, sorry? I have not been warned at all. When was I warned? When was I warned? No, you have no evidence of me being warned whatsoever. Absolutely. Wait, am I going to have an accident in your cells?
1762, Sergeant, are you the arresting officer?
Have a look through his pockets. Is there anything in the pockets like this?
There's nothing sharp in there. Can you pass my car keys to these people?
It might need moving. You might be causing an obstruction.
So I was obstructing the highway. Can we make that very clear? I was arrested for obstructing the highway.
That's what the officers told you, and we've got that on record.
I was warned numerous times, I think was the actual quote, numerous times today. Actually, I don't think I was warned at all, so I'd love to see the evidence gatherers footage. Look. Yeah.
So, as you could see, needless to say, once they got me down to the custody suite in York, and once the evidence gatherers footage was reviewed, they couldn't get me out of there quick enough. So I was held in custody for about 2 hours and then released without charge. Oh. And I got back to Kirby Misperton just in time to see the last two of the people involved in the lock-on actually being led away to be arrested. But clearly the sole intention of that arrest was to remove me and prevent the live streaming of the cutting out process.
I mean, let's be clear. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been doing this for quite a long time, and the only criminal offence that I saw committed in that video was the assault on you, frankly. And I, strongly suggest that you take that further.
Oh, it is being taken further. I can assure you of that.
I imagine it would be, yeah. I mean, one of the things I think is really interesting about North Yorkshire Police's response to the start of protests up at Kirkby Misperton is just how focused they are on attempting to manage the media message or manage the news that goes out there. So you'll be familiar, obviously, from being up on the front line in North Yorkshire, that the police have used. They've set up a separate separate website, which is outside of the usual sort of police domain names. So they've NYP KirkbyMisperton.org. They set up a Twitter feed and a Facebook page, and they've been very willing to put out information that they know will be picked up about people being arrested, and rather less prompt at explaining situations like yours, which is that many people end up being released without charge. And this is about trying to create from the beginning some greater control over the overall sort of media narrative, which has clearly got away in a massive way from the police up in Lancashire.
Well, and it's backfiring on them because they're committing own goal after own goal. And Kevin, I know you're aware of this, but this is a structure that manifested. Sorry, let me go back one here. That's a structure that manifested at the weekend. And this was taken in the morning, as is last Monday morning, so just 3 days ago. And as you can see, there are 3 people up on that platform there. And one of them is me, the one in the hat is me. And we were using that platform, and I was live streaming the removal team at work dealing with the lock-on that occurred that morning. Now, Inspector Mike Fenton was clearly not too happy that we had such a prominent position, and he invited us to come down, but we said, well, thanks very much for the invitation, but and we appreciate your concern about our safety, but we feel really quite comfortable up here. It's a very strong structure. And anyway, he decided that discretion be better part of valor and left us alone. But after the lock-on was complete, he became a little bit more aggressive. Now, as it happens, I was coming down anyway, but the gentleman in the middle there, sitting down, you can see in the cap, he quite rightly said, you have no power by which you can demand that I come down. And if you want to remove the structure, which is also being threatened, then you need to get an appropriate order. Well, North Yorkshire Police took it upon themselves to enter into farce because the platform was all of 7 feet tall. In fact, it was a 9-rung ladder up to the platform. And they decided that they would call out the North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. So they brought in this piece of kit from Scarborough. So this piece of kit had to come with its crew, the 24 miles or so from Scarborough. But the fire brigade told the police that they would not man the cradle, and that although they were happy to operate the equipment, well, happy is not really the right word, but although they felt obliged to operate the equipment, they would not actually go into the cradle to bring down the protector from the platform. So North Yorkshire Police, we understand, had to bring in a specialist rescue crew from West Yorkshire to go into the cradle to bring the protector down from this platform, which was all of 7 feet tall. Now, here you see it again. And so this piece of rescue kit was on site here for some 2 hours. So it was probably away from Scarborough for at least 4 hours. And woe betide, obviously, if there had been any incident in Scarborough which had required this essential piece of equipment. Now, we could tell that the fire service were very reluctant to participate in this process, but, they felt obliged to do so. But the following day, we received this email from the Secretary, Steve Howley, of North Yorkshire Fire Brigades Union. And I'd just like to read this out because I think this is extremely important. So Steve Howley writes, I would like to clear up some of the issues that have been raised with me and my comrades regarding the fire service attendants at the Kirkby Misperton site yesterday. Firstly, the campaigners have got the full solidarity of myself and the Fire Brigade Union. I voted in support of the anti-fracking resolution brought before the Fire Brigade Union National Conference, and personally I believe fracking has no place in our country, let alone in North Yorkshire. I signed up to support Frack Free United earlier this year. In terms of the fire service involvement, I am disgusted and disappointed that firefighters have been placed in such a position by the police, and secondly, senior fire service managers, by their decisions to force firefighters to attend the site yesterday. We are clear that this is not the role of the fire service, as we are there to render humanitarian services and save life and property, not provide law and order intervention. It continues, once I became aware of the situation, I raised the issue last night with the Assistant Chief Fire Officer, and he assured me that he would be speaking with his counterpart within North Yorkshire Police today to suggest that the fire service cannot be used in such a way again. We will await confirmation of this before the North Yorkshire Fire Brigade Union decide if we need to take further measures to prevent our members being unwantedly exposed to such situations again in the future. As I unfortunately am not responsible for running the fire service and therefore decisions made to attend such incidents, it would help me defend our position if you could send your email of concerns and questions as to why the service is being allowed to take a clear political stance by becoming involved in what is a lawful protest to the appropriate service channels via email. And there lists the email address in yellow. In solidarity, Steve Howley, North Yorkshire Fire Brigade Union, Brigade Secretary. I mean, this is a seminal response, Kevin.
I mean, it's wonderful that the Fire Brigades Union have taken that stand, and they have been one of the unions that's been really solid in relation to opposition to fracking. But the crucial point is that's in there is that the Fire Brigade have no business being involved in a law enforcement situation. There is an agreement that's been signed between various parties about issues around the Kirkby Misperton site, and I know that it's a document that you're familiar with, which is led by North Yorkshire Police and has a variety of other partners, including the council, obviously the company, the site security, and the fire brigade ambulance service. And the idea of that was to try and set out what the different roles may be. And what this incident does is break that agreement. It is absolutely outside of what was agreed about what the fire brigade would be used for. Now, this wasn't a situation where anybody's safety was being threatened, and I can understand why they wouldn't want to get up on the cradle, because the only intention of anybody being in that cradle was to pull somebody around down and arrest them. I mean, it is one of those situations where you kind of wonder what North Yorkshire Police are thinking about in terms of the impression that they're making on the local community, and what this disregard for how this might be viewed by people who live in an area which doesn't have any experience of protests, certainly not in the sense of, say, major urban areas might do. And it's staggering, really, that they've again taken such a gung-ho aggressive approach right from the off. And I think it is something which is very much tied to the kind of relationship that they have with the industry. I mean, you know that that Third Energy have got access, are in regular contact with police, because that's what the documents say. Our concern is that extends also to Third Energy essentially writing the press releases on behalf of everybody, including the police, about what's happening. But the one people that aren't in the briefings, the one people who aren't influencing the policing policy, the one people who aren't part of any of those discussions are local people, are the people that are actually on the front line. They're shut out completely from this. And the fiction that somehow the police are standing in the middle as this neutral body between trying to balance the interests of the industry on the one hand and the protesters on the other is just once again showed to be complete nonsense.
Well, I have to say, Kevin, in some ways, the behaviour of North Yorkshire Police is an absolute gift, because they are helping us to demonstrate to the local community that basically, they're not dealing with a police force here. It's a corporate enforcement force. And in fact, you know, this is a community that has had very, very little contact with the police. I mean, crime is very low. You know, it's a rural area. You know, people still leave their doors open. I mean, you know, it's that kind of environment. And, you know, so they have this vision that North Yorkshire Police is like a 21st century version of Heartbeat. But, you know, what they're beginning to realise is that actually it's something totally different, and the scales are falling away from their eyes at a phenomenal rate of knots. And in fact, the support at Kirkby Misperton that is increasing at a rate of knots that is actually being aided by the outrageous behaviour of the police.
Which is, I'm afraid, has been the experience of other places. I mean, some people have felt that they have been, you know, quite fearful about the police responses in Lancashire, but many, many others have said, I'm not prepared to step back and allow my rights to be taken away just because the police are behaving in a way which is fundamentally unacceptable. I mean, it has been something which has galvanised people, and I think will continue to galvanise people. But the problem is that this is still a public service, and it's still a public service which I think we should be demanding is accountable in some way, no matter how difficult that might be. So if Superintendent Dave Hannon and the officers under him are essentially behaving in a way which is completely and fundamentally at odds with their legal responsibilities, which is basically breaching their responsibility to protect the rights of freedom of assembly, we need to do something about it. We need to be able to push back. Certainly, if the situation about constantly harassing people who are taking pictures and filming develops, we, as NetPol, will be looking at the potential for legal action in relation to that. But I mean, the first thing and the most important thing is that people understand some of their basic rights. So, you know, that ability to be able to say, under what power am I legally obliged to do something, is something that not everybody knows. I mean, it may be second nature to yourself. You've been a campaigner for a long time, but for a lot of people, because they haven't been involved in something like this before, you know, they need to know this stuff. And it's really important we get that information out.
Absolutely.
You need to feel about being able to stand up.
Well, and by the way, Dave Hannon is trying to separate and also deter people from making complaints. I mean, on the North Yorkshire Police website, it makes it very clear that the ways in which you can submit a complaint are by using the website, which is extremely user-unfriendly, by phoning 101 or by calling into a North Yorkshire police station. Well, gaining entry into a police station these days is nigh on impossible if you can actually find one. But Dave Hannon has decreed that anybody phoning in to 101 to make a complaint against officers involved in Operation Kingfisher must be told that they have to do it in writing. And this is a clear attempt to obviously deter people from submitting their complaints. And by the way, I'm also told that there's an effort to try and keep Operation Kingfisher complaints separate from all other police complaints so that it doesn't skew the stats.
Well, I mean, I have to say, my experience of the police complaint system goes back even further than my involvement with protesters, right back to the early 90s. And on the benefit of having written a lot of complaints with people and on behalf of people, to a certain extent, I think it's probably a good idea that people put it in writing anyway, because it's amazing how what you say over the phone mysteriously doesn't get what isn't the same as recorded by the officers, you know, so you have some degree of control over that. I mean, you're quite right, though. I mean, if you want to make a written complaint using one of their forms, it's actually quite difficult to do. But it is still important. And one of the reasons why it's important, even notwithstanding all the problems there are with the complaint system and the fact that professional standards departments of police forces do their absolute utmost to try and fob you off, is that one of the indicators of how successful, quotes, an operation is the number of complaints. And what's happened before is the police have said, oh, well, you know, we've had hardly any complaints, so that means that people must be happy about the way we're conducting our operation. And so I think it is important, if people feel that they've been ill-treated, that they're not put off by this, and they do log those complaints with, you know, obviously that understanding that it may not go anywhere, but it's important to do. Because if there are people complaining, then it's more difficult for Superintendent Hannon and other officers to be able to say everybody's happy with the way we're conducting.
And by the way, there are as a small group of people in Kirby Misperton who all have legal backgrounds, who have all offered their services to help people write the complaints.
That's
so, you know, if you do feel you wish to make a complaint, then please, you know, get in contact with myself or with Eddie Thornton at Kirby Misperton, and we can point you in the direction of the people that are prepared to sit down and help you write the complaint. So we've run a bit over time, Kevin, but I knew we had a lot to discuss, and of course there's a lot more that we could discuss. So,
absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure, obviously, that you know, the pressure is going to increase. The British government, Theresa May's government, is certainly now under increasing pressure, as if she hasn't got enough problems. I mean, my sense is that she would still like to see the back of this, but you know, she's not about, well, she hasn't got the cojones, literally and metaphorically, to pull the plug on it. So obviously, you know, those of us that are committed to try to prevent this insidious industry from gaining a foothold in England, you know, we have to keep the pressure on. We have to keep doing whatever it is that we feel we have to do or are obliged to do, all under the guise, of course, of peaceful protest. So, Kevin, any sort of final words of counsel to people who may find themselves at the wrong end of North Yorkshire Police or any other police force, come to that, when they're on the anti-fracking campaign?
I think it's important that people remember that they're not on their own, that they are part of a movement, and there is support out there. And the commitment that I will certainly make on behalf of NetPol, not just to people at the Kirby Misperton, but other sites around the country, is that we will be there to make sure that we're pushing back against police brutality and violence. Let's call it what it is, police violence, so that people can feel that they don't have to burn up their energy on dealing with that, and they can focus on the industry itself. That's part of the reason why we do the work that we do, so that people don't get sidetracked from the fact that it's companies like Third Energy and Quadrilla and Ineos who are the main targets of people, where people's energy needs to be focused.
Yeah, absolutely, and of course, the better informed people are, and you know, the more the police know that people are better informed, in some cases better informed than the police themselves, then you know.
I look forward to being up at Kirby Misperton very soon to do another Know Your Right session with people on the ground.
That'll be excellent, Kevin. Really much appreciated. Thanks for joining me this evening.
No problem.
You know, it's unfortunate it's taken so long for us to actually get together on Fracking Nightmare, but hopefully we'll be able to do this more often as obviously the anti-fracking campaign increases in scale, as other companies, and not least Ineos, try to get their bits in the ground. So.
Again, as I said, we're not going anywhere.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. And we appreciate your support. And I've certainly learned a lot from NetPol and from yourself over the last few years. And I would, again, encourage people to go to the NetPol website. That's www.netpol.org. And we look at the resources that NetPol have put together to help people who elect to participate in the anti-fracking campaign, and literally to know your rights, know what the police can and can't do, because a lot of the time the police are blagging. They rely on people just acquiescing to their request because they're wearing a fancy dress, and you don't have to do that. They are as much required to uphold the law as anybody else. And in reality, they have very, very few special privileges. But right now, they're abusing their position, they're abusing uniform. And that's something that I think we have to hold them to account on. And just lastly, this evening, in the last episode of Fracking Nightmare, we met Inspector Johnny. At the time, he seemed somewhat reluctant to give me his full name. But there's some irony here, because this is actually Detective Inspector John Hodgen. He is the head of fraud and economic crime in North Yorkshire. And the irony is that he is on point facilitating a company that is operating with a negative net worth of £52.5 million. I mean, this is a company that under normal circumstances should be in liquidation. They have access to debt. They are deliberately manipulating their financial resources to keep as much as possible offshore so that they have zero liability here in the UK, so that if anything does go wrong, hey, they could just walk off into the night. And of course, all of Theresa May's statements about the profits that these companies are going to generate, well, those profits will never manifest because they're already operating in a massive black hole. So my counsel to Inspector Hodgen is actually take a look, and you, of all people, have the background to be able to look at their balance sheet, to look at their accounts and see that this is a Ponzi scheme of the highest order of magnitude. And you, sir, are on point pushing that agenda. So thanks very much for joining Kevin and myself tonight. We'll be back with the next episode of Fracking Nightmare in, I think it's about 5 weeks' time, because there's too much going on, and I'm going to be on the front line as much as I possibly can over the next few weeks. So look forward to seeing you at Kirby Misperton sometime very soon. Thanks a lot and good night.